Right, looks like we can get started. Let these couple people take a seat real quick. All right, so this is going to be planning for failure. My name is Beddome. I'm a former United States Marine, and hoorah! And a senior consultant at on the Attack and Pen team at AccuVant Labs. All right, so this talk. So whenever I talk about social engineering or teach somebody about social engineering, I always get asked what to do when it doesn't work. My wife told me I should do a talk on it, so this talk exists. So the main thing is graceful recovery, right? That's coming back when something goes wrong, being able to recover well and turn that into a benefit rather than a detriment. So that's what this talk's about. So throughout the talk, I'm going to use the fight metaphor. I use this for basically everything. So if you see another talk, it'll probably use the same metaphor. Anytime you approach a situation where someone else is in opposition against you, I say go into it like you're preparing for a fight, right? It might be because I'm a Marine. I see everything as a fight, but you'll see that as we go through the talk. All right, so this quote applies basically through the whole slide. So everybody has a plan until they get punched by the face by the Reverend. I just totally spaced his name, and he's an awesome boxer. All right, Mike Tyson. That's what you know. It's like the demo gods hate me right now. Overview of topics. All right, so we're going to go over methodology, prep, lead-in attacks, tie-in attacks, secondaries, and questions. All right, so for methodology, right? This is just how I do red team and social engineering attacks, and that's what this talk is going to mostly apply to. So I try to conduct quality reconnaissance and open source gathering. I try to make sure that I use that information to create a good quality attack scenario and to identify points of failure in my potential attack scenario, right? You can usually plan ahead on where the key things that could screw you up are going to be, and knowing that information ahead of time is going to help you do well. So then we're going to create probing attacks, tie-ins, lead-ins, and follow-on attacks, as well as unrelated secondaries, and I'll cover those as we go through the talk. And then we're going to execute the scenario, which is obviously the funnest part. So here's that attack scenario. Prep, getting swole, right? So every fight starts in the gym. Every fight starts in all the fights you've had before and every experience you've had up to that moment. So it's that preparation that's really going to decide how well you do. So preparation is going to involve that reconnaissance we talked about, creating a quality scenario, identifying points of failure. So this is the big thing, right? Points of failure include the questions people are going to ask you during if it's a social engineering engagement, or the things you're going to run into during a network or application layer attack, and how those things are going to stop you. If you identify those ahead of time, what questions they're going to ask, what type of mitigating controls are going to be in place, the types of events that are going to screw you up, you can then make additional planning that compensates for those issues. And that planning is really kind of the core of the talk. That's how we gracefully recover, right? If we plan for the things that we can foresee, then we have more brain resources to use for the things that we can't foresee. So we're in a more comfortable position when we hit something we weren't prepared for in the first place. So a tool I use for prepping is I call it the attack tree. You can see my little tree with the hatchet, right? So the attack tree is just a flow chart. All it is says, this is my scenario, this is my first step, here are the things that could happen, and if those things happen, here's what my plan of attack is. By planning that ahead of time, I minimize the stress and the issues when it actually happens down the road. So the moral of the story is that proper planning prevents poor performance, but I like to be a Marine and say it prevents piss poor performance, just because I guess expletives make everything more interesting. So if we plan ahead, we can do better execution as we go. So let's get into how we actually do that. First is when we're planning our scenario, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create what lead-in attacks, or in the fight metaphor, feints, right? These feints are small jabs and attacks that probe a target's defenses and establish what they're prepared for and what they're not prepared for, right? So we're going to use those feints to identify things like what type of AV they're running. Are they using application whitelisting? Are they using different types of mitigating controls and protections that are going to stop the scenario you are already prepared to launch? If you have a scenario that hinges on someone navigating to a website and putting in credentials, and they have application black and whitelisting in place, they're never going to get to the website, so your scenario is dead in the water now. Find that ahead of time with these probing attacks. You can adapt, modify your scenario before actual execution. Same with network and application layer attacks. Doing little small scanning and probing lets you really identify what targets and what type of vulnerabilities you're going to be exploiting, and also what things are going to stop what you think you're going to be doing. So tie-in and follow-on attacks. These are the combos, right? It's not always a delicious treat. Sometimes it's a 1-2 punch that actually gets you that success you really want. So this is important because when we do an attack, usually a lot of people will just do one scenario. If it doesn't work, they collect their percentage ratings and they move on. What I like to do in a lot of cases is I like to create tied-in combo attacks, right? So let's say I do a social engineering engagement where I'm doing email phishing. I might send out an email phishing attack, and that gets a certain amount of credentials. Well, I want more credentials because, credentials and payloads, you never have enough, right? So I'm going to create another attack that says, well, we just finished conducting a social engineering assessment of you guys, so log into this portal to see you and your team's results, and I'll get the other 60%, right? Or when you go through and do an email phishing attack, you can actually do a pretexting attack afterwards that says, well, we're doing incident response to the social engineering email attack. And that'll actually build another level of rapport and a level of trust that'll help you do some crazy stuff when you're doing your social engineering as part of your red team assessments. So it's important to understand that one attack isn't the only way to do it. If you create multiple layers of attacks, you hedge your bets in case one thing doesn't work. You also increase your level of success. So unrelated secondaries, right? The sucker punch. So this is kind of like the tie-in attacks and the combos, except what this does for you is this is a completely unrelated second layer of attack. So this could be something like a network attack while you're doing a social engineering attack. This could be pretexting while you're doing email phishing. This could be doing physical while you have a partner doing network layer stuff. Usually one of the advantages of secondary attacks is to distract the number of resources they have to respond to issues to focus on one attack while you're executing the other attack, right? So either attack can be successful, but if one draws the attention off, the other one has a greater success rate. One example is someone runs a really loud, noisy pretext or network layer, an application layer attack while your cohort is walking through the front door, right? Most likely is everyone's going to be in a scramble, responding to this, trying to shut down firewalls, trying to look at logging, trying to do incident response. Meanwhile, while everything's going crazy and all their resources are dedicated somewhere else, you have someone who walked in, plugged in a Linux box, a little POEM plug, and then left, right? So that's where I talk about unrelated secondaries. So the point of this talk, the real big thing is that it's really not about how awesome your scenario is or how crazy an O-Day or cool exploit you have. It's about how well your attack strategy can stand up to the mitigations and the defenses of your adversary, which in many times is your client or your target. So that being said, when we do our preparation, what we should really be focusing on to not only provide better success rates, but really a higher quality to our client and to the people that we're interacting with, is by creating well fleshed out, real world, well planned, responsive, and gracefully recovering scenarios that allow us to not only test one limited group of controls and get a potential medium to small rate of success, but also to test a wide range of controls and how they're able to spread load their resources, the different controls they have in place on both network, application, and social engineering, and how those controls all work together to create a cohesive level of defense rather than a piece of defense that can be divided and conquered by using these preparation techniques. So that being said, I covered the main points. I want to go back and just cover a couple things since I went a little fast. I really want to talk about lead-in attacks, especially in preparation. So lead-in attacks, I think, are the most integral and most important and impactful part of the social engineering and also red teaming, right? Because doing a red team engagement's fun, doing social engineering's fun, but if you don't know what you're going into ahead of time, you can really put yourself in a negative position, one, for low success rates, and two, the quality of the thing you're providing, the output you're providing to your client gets greatly reduced. Because if you go into an situation blind, like any fight, you're most likely going to lose, right? So I like to spend a good amount of time really enumerating what the key points of defense are in related to the key points of failure that we identified. So when we're going through, you guys all know when you create a scenario, what's going to defeat you. Are they going to ask, if you're doing a pretext calling, for example, are they going to ask what your name is? They sure are, right? They're going to say, I don't see you in AD. Or if they see you in AD, they're going to ask you some defining questions about who you are in AD. So you need to have done your preparation. If you don't have the answers to those questions, you need to have reasons why you don't have those answers. And by identifying that ahead of time, instead of having to make them up on the fly, you'll have them preset. And for a lot of us, I know a lot of people in the information security industry, we like having a plan. We like things to be able to fit into a script. We like things to be able to fit into kind of a predefined box that works in an expected way. And where that's not always possible with interacting with people, it is more possible when we spend that additional time doing preparation and planning. And one of the best ways to do that is to lead an attack. So an example would be I call you, and instead of trying to get any real information from you, I just want to chat you up and have a conversation. And during the natural course of that conversation, hopefully I will be able to discover or lead that conversation in directions where I'll be able to find out, can you get to specific websites? Do you have whitelisting in place? What kind of AV operating system? And maybe potentially what type of patch levels you have in place. And that lets me see if is my best approach gathering credentials, or should I really be targeting you with a specific payload or exploit? And then when we tie that into all our different scenarios, we can create multiple levels of scenarios and multiple attack approaches that really help us greatly capitalize on those things that we identified. So when you create your scenario, great. But before you finalize that, make sure you go through and get permission from your client and do those things to do your due diligence, either through OSINT or through the probing attacks and just some basic superficial interactions with clients. Even if that just means driving by the parking lot, stopping and smoking in the smoking area and chatting up a couple people without actually trying to enter the building. You know, if we're doing a physical, that's a good way. I don't smoke, but I have some colleagues who do. And when I do a 2-team approach, have one of them go smoke sometimes and just check out with people, touch base. And you can usually gather a lot of information just from interacting with people. And that creates just a greater overall chance of success, which we all want to get shells, right? So that being said, that's all I got. It was a little quick, but anyone got any questions or concerns, things I want to ask? Yes, sir.
Can you tell us some scenarios about, like, say, office pre-getters and how you handle those situations?
You mean like people trying to catch me in the act?
Yes.
So I can. There's a story that's not necessarily mine that stands out to me that I always keep in mind when I go into a physical. So one of my supervisors at one point in my life told me a story that he went in and he gave his scenario, and the security guard pulled a gun on him and pointed it in his face. He said, "That's not who you are, that's a lie." And he said, "Congratulations, you're the first one who caught me," and explained that he was doing a physical assessment, all these things. And the guy said, "Oh, okay," felt really great that he had caught that person in the act. We put his gun away, and about 10 minutes later, he was escorting that individual into the server room without validation, because he felt so good about having been the only one who did the right thing, right? And that's kind of the mentality I try to keep in mind. Now, obviously, someone pulls a gun on you, you should probably just say, "Okay, it's done," and walk away, right? But in most situations, when someone calls me on something, the first thing I do is try to seed a kernel of doubt, right? I know that it says that I think it's in Inception, the seed of doubt, right? So this is just that one little thing to get them to maybe question the things they're thinking, right? So they'll say, well, so one instance, I did a financial institution at my last job. I walked in and I said, "I'm this guy from this department." And she said, "Well, I called that department and that's not who you are." And I said, "Oh, well, I report to audit, not to IT." And she goes, "Oh, that's what the issue is." Went down and we sat down and she tried to get a hold of everyone, but I'd showed up early enough, I'd done my prep, and I knew what their office hours. I showed up early enough that the corporate office wasn't in yet. So she tried to call everyone in the corporate office and no one answered the phone. I said, "Well, if it makes you feel more comfortable, you can just escort me to all the locations I need to be in, and then escort me out. And that way you're covered and I'm covered and I get to do my job and we're all happy." So great. So after the first 4 or 5 locations I got her to take me to, which were all BS locations, I had her take me to the DR site downstairs. We go into the DR site. At this point, she trusts me. We've talked about our kids. We've had some conversations. She stands at the front door and I walk to the far back and plug a device into the server rack. So that being said, if someone says, "Well, I caught you," there's always that chance to recover. And how you plan for that recovery is thinking, what is the best way they're going to validate my identity when they catch me? And how can I really circumvent that and undermine their trust there? And once you can get them to a point where they're willing to at least listen to what you're saying, you can then start injecting new levels of scenario and new types of attacks. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How long do you spend on the
So that question is kind of, I don't have a set amount of time. So I do my reconnaissance for the first maybe day or two ahead of time.
How
Oh, the question was, how long do I spend on reconnaissance? So it varies by client, it varies by target, it varies by the situation and the type of industry you're targeting. Some industries and organizations have more information exposed, some have less. But in the end, really, you need to identify, first thing is to identify the information that you absolutely need. And then you need to spend the due diligence to get the information that gets that for you, or the information that will allow you to get that through other avenues. So if you think you can only get that information by talking to someone, you need to identify what type of information that you're going to need to validate who you are to get them to talk to you about those things. I know it's not a very finite answer, but hopefully that answered your question. Yes, sir.
Do you design your secondary?
Sure.
Do you have a portfolio, or do you design based on
I have a portfolio based on things that work, but I usually custom tailor them to each client. I think we're about ready to wrap up on time.
I was saying, please repeat the question.
Oh, okay, sorry. The question was, do I have a set portfolio of secondaries, or do I design them from case to case? So the answer is both. I do have a set portfolio that work, and what I usually do is I tailor them to fit a situation. A lot of corporate environments are very similar, right? Kind of everything's copy-paste for the most part, and you can usually just adapt things based on small bits of like what individual organizational lingo and different organizational culture influences how they do things. You know, if one group calls their IT department the tech support department, the other one calls them the information technology support department, those little things will, just adding that flavor will usually make those secondaries that I have pre-canned successful. But in a situation that's unique or in a more advanced environment, I'll usually custom tailor those. Questions? Hey, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much.